August 17, 1943. Luftwaffe Fighter Base, Wiesbaden, Germany. Hauptmann Egon Meyer, one of the Luftwaffe's most successful bomber destroyers with over 100 victories, briefed his squadron on the day's mission. American B-17 flying fortresses were approaching from England, targeting the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, a raid that would become one of the most significant air battles in history. Meyer had been attacking American bomber formations for 8 months. He understood the B-17's capabilities intimately. He had studied its weaknesses, developed tactics to exploit them, and trained his pilots in methods that had proven devastatingly effective against unescorted bombers. The B-17 is a flying warehouse, Meyer told his assembled pilots. It is large, slow, unmaneuverable. Maximum speed is 287 miles per hour. We can catch them easily. They fly in tight formations, attempting to concentrate defensive fire, but this makes them predictable. Our Focke-Wulf 19s can attack at 400 miles per hour, fire, and break away before their gunners can track us effectively. The assessment was accurate by every metric Luftwaffe doctrine valued. The B-17 was massive, 65 feet long with a 103-foot wingspan, weighing 54,000 pounds fully loaded. It was slow compared to fighters that could exceed 400 miles per hour. It was unmaneuverable. The massive bomber couldn't execute the violent, evasive maneuvers that fighters used to survive combat. By traditional aircraft performance standards, the B-17 was a target, not a threat. They call it the Flying Fortress, Meyer continued, gesturing at intelligence photographs showing B-17s bristling with defensive armament. 13.50 caliber machine guns covering all approach angles, but we have learned their blind spots. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high. The nose guns have limited traverse. We can close to 200 meters, fire our 20mm cannon, and break away before their defensive fire becomes effective. What Meyer and the Luftwaffe could not fully comprehend, what 8 months of combat had hinted at but not yet definitively proven, was that the Americans had not built a fast bomber or a maneuverable bomber. They had built something entirely different, a bomber designed to absorb catastrophic damage, maintain formation integrity, and continue to target regardless of losses. The B-17 was not meant to avoid destruction. It was meant to survive it. Within hours, Meyer and his squadron would engage a formation of B-17s in combat that would cost the Luftwaffe 17 fighters and accomplish exactly what American strategic bombing doctrine had predicted. The bombers would reach their target, drop their ordnance, and enough would return home to make the mission tactically successful, despite horrific losses. The B-17 Flying Fortress had emerged from a 1934 Army Air Corps requirement for a multi-engine bomber capable of defending American coastlines. Boeing's design emphasized defensive armament, structural resilience, and the ability to operate at altitudes where contemporary fighters struggled. The prototype first flew in 1935, and by 1943, Boeing was producing B-17 at a rate of 16 per day. German intelligence had studied the B-17 extensively. Luftwaffe technical officers recognized its defensive armament was formidable. 13.50 caliber machine guns provided overlapping fields of fire, covering virtually every approach angle. But they also recognized what they considered fatal flaws. The aircraft was too large to hide, too slow to run, and too unmaneuverable to evade. By Luftwaffe doctrine, these characteristics made it vulnerable despite its armament. Major Gunther Rohl, a Luftwaffe ace with over 200 victories, described the initial German assessment. We examined the B-17 and saw a bomber that violated sound aircraft design. It was overbuilt. Too much structure, too much weight, too much defensive armament. The Americans had sacrificed speed and maneuverability for protection. We believed this was a fundamental error. In aerial combat, the aircraft that cannot be hit survives. The aircraft that can absorb hits but cannot avoid them will eventually be destroyed. This assessment reflected conventional aerial warfare wisdom that had dominated since World War I. Aircraft survived through speed, maneuverability, and avoiding enemy fire. The B-17 represented a different philosophy. Aircraft survived through structural resilience, coordinated defensive fire, and accepting that damage was inevitable but could be survived. The first major test of this philosophy came during the raid on Schweinfurt on August 17, 1943. The American 8th Air Force launched 376 B-17 bombers against the ball-bearing factories, flying without fighter escort for much of the route because P-47 Thunderbolts lacked the range to accompany bombers deep into Germany. Hauptmann Egon Meyer's JG-2 intercepted the lead formations near Aachen. The German pilots executed textbook attacks, head-on passes at 400 miles per hour, 20mm cannon fire concentrated on cockpits and engines, breaking away before defensive fire could track them. Multiple B-17s fell from formation, trailing smoke and fire. The attacks seemed devastatingly effective, but something unexpected was happening. B-17s, that had taken cannon hits that should have been fatal, remained in formation. Aircraft with engines destroyed maintained altitude on remaining engines. Bombers with massive structural damage continued flying. The attrition that Luftwaffe doctrine predicted, that concentrated fighter attacks would break bomber formations and force survivors to turn back, was not materializing. Lieutenant Franz Stigler, flying with JG-27, engaged a B-17 named Ye Olde Pub that had been separated from its formation. Stigler closed to point-blank range and fired repeatedly. He observed his cannon rounds striking the bomber's wings, fuselage, and tail. One engine was destroyed and trailing smoke. The tail gunner was clearly dead. Portions of the tail structure were shot away, yet the bomber continued flying. Stigler pulled alongside and observed the extent of damage. It defied comprehension that the aircraft remained airborne. The rudder was barely functional. Hydraulic fluid streamed from multiple punctures, yet the pilot maintained control, flying toward England at 135 miles per hour, far below normal cruise speed but still flying. Stigler made a decision that would become legendary. Rather than deliver the killing shot, he escorted the crippled bomber to the coast, protecting it from other German fighters. In post-war interviews, Stigler explained his reasoning. The bomber should not have been flying. The damage was catastrophic, yet it flew. I had already killed the aircraft. It simply refused to acknowledge this fact. I could not shoot a man in a parachute. The crew in that bomber was already in a parachute that happened to still have wings. Ye Olde Pub landed in England with over 400 holes from cannon and machine gun fire. The Boeing engineers who examined the damage classified it as the worst battle damage any B-17 had survived to that point. Every system had redundancy, and when primary systems failed, secondary and tertiary systems maintained basic flight capability. The Schweinfurt raid cost the Americans 60 B-17s, a devastating 16% loss rate. By traditional assessment, this proved Luftwaffe doctrine correct. Concentrated fighter attacks could inflict unsustainable losses on unescorted bombers. German pilots celebrated the victory, claiming they had proven American strategic bombing was unsustainable. But they had misunderstood what they had witnessed. Of the 316 B-17 that reached Schweinfurt, 256 successfully bombed the target, despite continuous fighter attack. The ball-bearing factories sustained significant damage, and critically, the structural resilience of the B-17 meant that many aircraft classified as destroyed had actually crash-landed in England or made emergency landings, with crews surviving to fly again. General Adolf Galland, commanding the Luftwaffe fighter arm, recognized the deeper problem in his assessment of the raid. We shot down 60 American planes, bombers, a magnificent victory by any standard. Yet over 250 reached their target and dropped their ordnance. We fired over 10,000 cannon rounds and 50,000 machine gun bullets. Many bombers should have fallen, but did not. The Americans have built an aircraft that defies the normal relationship between damage and destruction. We are learning that shooting a B-17 and destroying a B-17 are not the same thing. The resilience came from Boeing's deliberate over-engineering. The B-17 structure included redundant spars, multiple load-bearing members, and distributed stress systems. When one structural element failed, others assumed the load. The 4 engines were positioned to allow the aircraft to fly on any 2 engines, or even 1 in emergencies. The control systems featured manual backup for every hydraulic system. Fuel tanks were self-sealing, preventing the catastrophic fires that destroyed most aircraft. Most significantly, the aircraft was designed around protecting the crew. Armor plating protected pilots, bombardier, and vulnerable positions. The design accepted that the aircraft would be hit. The question was whether hits would kill crew members or merely damage systems that could be compensated for. By late 1943, Luftwaffe pilots were reporting psychological effects from attacking B-17 formations. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke recorded in his combat diary, "We attack with everything. Cannon, rockets, even aerial bombs dropped from above. The formations absorb our attacks like a sponge absorbs water. Individual bombers fall, yes, but the formation continues. They do not break, they do not turn back. We shoot them full of holes and they continue flying. It is unnatural. It violates the logic of aerial combat." The phenomenon Knoke described was the second element of B-17 effectiveness, formation integrity. American doctrine emphasized maintaining tight formations regardless of damage or losses. Bombers would not break formation to evade attackers. They would not turn back if damaged. They maintained position, providing overlapping defensive fire that created a defensive sphere difficult for fighters to penetrate. German pilots discovered that attacking B-17 formations was fundamentally different from attacking individual bombers. A lone B-17 was vulnerable. A formation of 21 B-17s, flying in a combat box with overlapping fields of fire from 273.50 caliber machine guns, was extremely dangerous. German fighters had to penetrate this defensive fire, deliver their attack, and escape before concentrated fire destroyed them. The mathematics were brutal. A German fighter attacking a B-17 formation had approximately 3 to 4 seconds in firing position before it had to break away or be destroyed by defensive fire. In those seconds, the pilot had to aim, fire, and hit vital areas on an aircraft specifically designed to survive such hits. Meanwhile, the bomber gunners had the same 3 to 4 seconds to fire at a fighter with minimal armor and no self-sealing tanks. Hauptmann Wilhelm Jonen, who survived the war despite flying over 400 combat missions, described the psychological evolution. In 1943, we believed we were hunters, and the bombers were prey. By 1944, we understood we were engaged in mutual destruction. Yes, we could shoot down bombers, but they could shoot down our fighters, and the fundamental equation was unsustainable. They could replace bombers faster than we could replace pilots. The B-17 was not superior to our fighters in performance. It was superior in the mathematics of attrition. The second Schweinfurt raid on October 14, 1943, forever known as Black Thursday, demonstrated both the devastating effectiveness of Luftwaffe fighter tactics and the fundamental resilience of American strategic bombing doctrine. The Americans lost 77 bombers, nearly 20% of the attacking force. By any traditional military calculus, this was an unsustainable loss rate. Yet the raid proved Gallen's earlier assessment correct. Over 200 B-17s reached Schweinfurt and delivered their ordnance. The ball-bearing factories sustained further damage that disrupted German production for months, and the 77 bombers destroyed had absorbed the ammunition expenditure of over 300 German fighters making multiple attack runs, ammunition that had to be manufactured, transported, and loaded, all while German factories were under increasing bombardment. The Americans could afford these losses because Boeing, Douglas, and Vega were producing B-17 at a combined rate of 16 per day by late 1943. Training facilities were graduating bomber crews at corresponding rates. The industrial capacity existed to sustain 20% loss rates, horrific by human measure, but sustainable by industrial measure. Germany could not sustain equivalent losses. Luftwaffe fighter production, while increasing, could not match attrition rates from both combat losses and the training accidents inherent in rushed pilot production. More critically, pilot training had been compressed from 18 months to 6 months, producing aviators with inadequate experience to survive against veteran American gunners. By early 1944, the psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots was severe. They were achieving tactical victories, shooting down multiple bombers per mission, yet strategic defeat was becoming apparent. the bombers kept coming. Formations that lost a third of their aircraft 1 week returned at full strength the next. German pilots would shoot down 50 B-17s in a major raid, then face 60 more the following day. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's leading aces, recorded his assessment in February 1944. "We are shooting down more bombers than ever before. Our tactics are effective. Our weapons are adequate, but the Americans replace losses faster than we can inflict them. The B-17 is individually vulnerable. We can destroy them, but collectively they are invincible because they are unlimited. We face not aircraft, but American industry. You cannot shoot down a factory." The introduction of long-range P-51 Mustang escorts in early 1944 changed the tactical equation, but did not fundamentally alter the strategic reality. German fighters now faced a choice: attack bombers and be vulnerable to escort fighters, or engage escorts and allow bombers free passage. Either option resulted in German losses that could not be sustained. The B-17's structural resilience continued producing results that defied German expectations. Aircraft returned to base with damage that should have caused catastrophic failure. Boeing engineers documented B-17s returning with entire sections of wing missing, tail structures shot away, 3 of 4 engines destroyed, fuselage penetrated by dozens of cannon shells, hydraulic systems completely destroyed. Each incident validated the design philosophy. The B-17 was not designed to avoid damage. It was designed to survive damage, maintain altitude, stay in formation, reach the target, and return home, despite catastrophic hits that would have destroyed conventional bombers. Statistics from the 8th Air Force operations told the story. Of B-17s classified as severely damaged in combat, 68% returned to base and landed successfully. 23% crashed in England, but with crew survival. Only 9% were total losses with crew casualties. This survival rate was unprecedented in aerial warfare. The Germans were inflicting damage, but damage was not translating to aircraft destruction at rates that prevented mission accomplishment. By mid-1944, Luftwaffe doctrine had fundamentally shifted. Rather than attempting to destroy bomber formations through fighter attack, German forces focused on disrupting formations and picking off stragglers. The recognition was implicit. Concentrated B-17 formations could not be stopped by available German fighter forces. The best that could be achieved was marginal attrition. General Adolf Galland's final assessment, delivered in November 1944, acknowledged complete strategic failure. The American bomber offensive has succeeded not because their bombers are invulnerable, we shoot them down daily, but because they are sufficiently vulnerable that we must expend resources we cannot replace to achieve victories that do not prevent mission success. The B-17 is not a superior aircraft by performance standards. It is a superior weapons system by attrition standards. They built an aircraft that could sustain losses we cannot inflict fast enough to matter. The final statistics validated American design philosophy. The 8th Air Force flew 291,508 bomber sorties over Europe. German fighters and flak destroyed 4,754 B-17 bombers, a loss rate of 1.6%. For every B-17 destroyed, 30 completed their missions and returned to base. The aircraft that German pilots had initially dismissed as too slow and too large had proven unstoppable not through performance, but through resilience. German pilots who survived the war reflected on the B-17 with grudging respect. Franz Stigler, the pilot who had escorted the crippled Ye Olde pub to safety, met the bomber's pilot Charlie Brown in 1990. At their reunion, Stigler was asked what he remembered most about the B-17. "The refusal to die," Stigler answered. "I shot that bomber to pieces. I saw the damage. Any rational aircraft would have fallen from the sky. It kept flying. That was not the pilot's skill, though he was skilled. That was American engineering. They built an aircraft that could not be killed by conventional means. We learned this slowly, bomber by bomber, mission by mission. By the time we fully understood what we faced, the war was already lost." The B-17 Flying Fortress proved that in strategic warfare, Resilience matters more than performance. The bomber that was too slow to run, too large to hide, and too unmaneuverable to evade had accomplished its mission through the simple brute force approach of absorbing damage and continuing regardless. German pilots were shocked not because the B-17 was fast or agile, but because it was relentless, a flying manifestation of American industrial capacity and engineering philosophy that valued mission completion over crew preservation, accepted losses as inevitable, and built systems robust enough to sustain those losses indefinitely. The slow bombers kept coming because they were designed to keep coming, and in the end, that made all the difference.